This is just a forewarning on the negative points I make when addressing Sundered. By no means is my video trying to degrade or try to discredit Thunder Lotus Gaming and the hundreds of hours put into Sundered. The game has just as many ups as it does downs. I just felt inspired to understand why the game didn't click with me as I tried to finish it. And as a result, I made a video about it. While it is one thing to look at a game, movie, or anything else in a creative field and call it out on its faults, I hope no one sees this as blind hatred towards the game or its creators. If you have any contrasting thoughts or perspectives on the game, please feel free to share down below in the comments. 1986, the year that literally nothing happened except for the introduction of Metroidvanias. Oh wait, Oprah premiered that year. Since its inception, Metroidvanias had essentially stuck to their guns when it came to game design, putting heavy emphasis on either one of three main elements surrounding the genre: combat, exploration, and platforming, supplementing each other and enriching the player's experience. The simplicity of the genre allows for many developers to use Metroidvanias as a foundation for a plethora of games. Some games are even seen as homages to their roots, and others crafting a game not noticeable at first glance, but nonetheless holding all the elements present to be deemed one. Unfortunately, with such creative freedom, many games tend to lose their charm and appeal along the way, such as Thunder Lotus's 2017 release, Sundered. It is what's Sundered, where integral gameplay elements are missing or replaced to fit the game's new design philosophy, missing many features that garnered the fanfare for their predecessors, and even missing vital elements on their core gameplay, resulting from trying to integrate too many ideas. At Metroidvania at heart, Sundered incorporates numerous roguelite elements to breathe new life into the genre, but as a result, it crumbles under the weight of too many ideas and too many missteps. One shining example being the Elder Shards earned throughout the game. The shards are bestowed upon players after defeating many of the bosses, who are then given two choices: either become corrupted by the power, or purge them by incineration. Both of the choices then upgrade your character depending on which decision you make for each full shard. This is fine in practice, but fails in execution. Outside of looking it up beforehand, you are blind to every decision you make when choosing the two paths. This would be negligible if both options were equal in how exciting and game-altering the boss would be. Just reading through the list, it's unfortunately lopsided. The path of corruption is rich with base upgrades to abilities you acquired throughout your time playing, delivering with exciting options such as directional dashes, glide, and even more captivating movement options. While purging the shards give players uninspired upgrades, ranging from an extra jump to base damage boost to your basic attacks. It becomes an even bigger problem because players cannot refund their spent shards and are blocked with their uninformed decisions, essentially leaving you to feel like you've wasted such a valuable resource. I won't go too in depth about how I think about the combat now, but I'll just leave it at this. These upgrades were more prevalent throughout the game as opposed to being optional. Many of my gripes I bring up later would have been eased. Just looking at the amount of creativity that can be implemented through the platforming and combat, these upgrades make Sundered look like an entirely different game. Like many other roguelike inspired games, Sundered emphasizes the inevitability of death, accomplishing this by trivializing death itself and even expediting the player's progression by spawning them on top of their win condition, a currency-based skill tree, serving as a replacement to traditional scaling found in Metroidvanias by finding items such as health boost or extra ammo, succeeding in streamlining the player's progression by having a central hub to increase their firepower, instead of the typical Easter egg hunt in most Metroidvanias, but ultimately failing in its design to show any form of substantial progression or introduce build diversity. Sunder's core gameplay philosophy is a typical roguelike gameplay loop. Players advance further and further until their resources are exhausted, die, respawn, and bolster their character for the next run, creating a sense of progression for players and pushing them through a stress test to examine their game knowledge and technical capabilities. This upward progression through hours of grind and exploration is supposed to empower the player, showing them that they are capable of beating that boss, and that maybe the upgrade they've been brushing off for the last few runs is actually the key to their success. A similar game that executes this with flying colors is Supergiant's Hades. Hades excels at creating a sense of progression through its tough as nails enemies, almost boundless upgrades, and even in its narrative. Everything in the game points at one objective for the player: keep going up. I feel the sense of empowerment is lacking within Sundered and its gameplay loop. While you grow stronger as you continue to delve through the map, the rewards for doing so feel shallow and empty. Instead of learning enemy patterns and slaying foes with exciting new abilities, the upward progression that you find is based upon numbers, padding stats such as base damage, resistance, and shield capacity. The linear progression is a cause of skill tree and its facade of freedom of choice. When you explore many of the branching routes, you notice that they are almost indistinguishable, making the very first life feel practically identical to the second, third, and 100th. One thing that suffers as a result of the leveling system is the combat, introducing players to few substantial game changes to warrant having so much hack and slash tied in the game. The flaws found in the combat would be trivial if it were not for how Sundered approaches enemy spawns. The procedurally generated map that changes every time the player dies challenges the tradition of conventional and strategic enemy placements to serve as obstacles for players. As a result of their ruins being shifted around, Thunder Lotus replaces predetermined enemies with random mob rushes. These mob swarms are dependent on various triggers, affecting the size and frequency of each horde. On paper, this sounds like an exciting and engaging way of putting a twist to the genre, but in practice, it just doesn't make for fun gameplay. Mainly due to three major flaws found in the combat system: the player-to-environment interactions, enemy scaling, and the frequency at which enemies spawn. For the environmental interactions, much of the fault comes from there being little to no positive feedback when striking anything, leaving many exchanges feeling very disjointed, with both the player and the enemies rarely responding to any damage cast upon each other. This would not be a problem if the combat didn't consume half the game, with enemies spawning in very frequently. The constant flooding of enemies subjecting players to engage in uninteresting, drawn-out, or repetitive combat, effectively painting itself as an unavoidable chore as opposed to being an exciting change of pace. As for the enemy scaling, this is in part due to the skill tree as well. Many late game areas being harder to traverse, not because of the player's inability to adapt and learn, but solely due to the players not having enough base upgrades to withstand hits. While the ramp up in damage may be intrinsic in other games, it is generally compounded by the enemy's design, such as predictable attack patterns, telegraphed yet deadly moves, or a weakness to a new upgrade, allowing for those either skilled, patient, or well equipped enough to venture through dangerous environments. However, in Sundered, the AI for many of the enemies revolve around one objective. While this isn't inherently bad, it's the fact that so many enemies act in this manner that make going through mid to late game areas more frustrating than anything else. I often begin to think that a considerable part of the gameplay probably did want players to have combat to be more of an option, rather than just dealing with enemies as they appeared. Many upgrades and combat elements stitching into movement the more you learn and experiment, such as the momentum garnered through using the laser cannon, allowing for substantial sequence breaks, and the use of refreshing your double jump after striking an enemy, which I didn't know about until I read the loading screen tooltip. But then again, why wouldn't there be more upgrades involved in that rather than turning your character into a damage sponge? Sundered may have a few hiccups along the way, but it is by no means a terrible game. Although the gameplay may leave much to be desired, the beauty of Sundered lies in its atmosphere and general settings. The game's hand-drawn animation and mysterious lore kept me coming back for more than anything else. It is also a valiant and commendable effort to tread new grounds to reinvent and create a new genre. Thanks to developers like Thunder Lotus, consumers and other like-minded developers can see and understand what can work and what issues may occur when treading unfamiliar paths.